Okay, today's Q&A is about Matzah Shemurah, and the question is: are all brands of Matzah Shemurah basically the same, or Kashrus wise, of course, or are there differences that you should be paying attention to? So let's do about this briefly. So making Matzah Shemurah has two parts to it. One is avoiding it chametz, and the second is doing it lishma, which we'll talk about. Both of those, and the bakeries use different methods to accomplish these goals, and of course that makes a difference as to what you're buying. The first part is making sure that when we mix the flour and water together to make matzah, we don't by mistake end up making chametz. So the first steps of that are we make sure that the wheat has to be harvested before it gets ripened, because you don't want it to get wet out in the field, rained on in the field once it ripens. You also have to set aside water the night before. It's called mayim shalanu. Before you bake, the water has to be set aside the night before, and those are all to help avoid chametz. Also, everybody is pretty well known that when you mix flour and water together, you have to bake them within 18 minutes. And on the basic level, of course, everybody does that. Everybody makes sure that the matzah are baked within 18 minutes. But so to do that, that means is that every 18 minutes you want to clean up all the surfaces and the equipment and everything that you use for making the matzah, because you don't want to have a bit of dough to last from one batch to another batch, or else that dough will have been around for more than 18 minutes. So the matzah gets into the oven by 18 minutes, so you wouldn't want to leave a piece of dough from one batch for the next batch. Now there are some other halachic requirements. I'll just quickly mention them, having to do with having windows in the bakery, additives to the water, and the amount of time between the time you mill the flour and you use it, using very small amounts of flour in each batch, making sure the matzahs are fully baked, and avoiding matzahs that have folds or bubbles or kfuls and nefuchas. Okay, so now, but a complication is that the din says that if the dough becomes hot or warm, then it becomes chametz even in less than 18 minutes. So getting in 18 minutes is not going to be good enough. The only thing that prevents that from happening is if the dough is being kneaded or worked with. It's called asek. You're working with the dough. Then that prevents it from becoming chametz. Now, this whole thing is complicated by the fact that the kneading itself causes friction, and that heats up the dough. So heating the dough makes it chametz happen faster, but kneading it causes that. And also is that you're baking matzah means you have an oven, and the oven is of course boiling hot. So that means you have to take special steps like fans or air conditioning or putting walls in the right places to avoid the heat from that oven spreading back to the place where the dough is to make the chametz happen faster. Now, because we don't know how fast chametz happens once the dough gets hot, so the best setup is that there should be continual asik from the time the flour will get mixed together and you start kneading until it gets into the oven. Okay, now that was part one of making matzah. The second half is to make it. You wanted to make it shmura, which is that it's made with the intention that it could be used for the mitzvah of eating matzah at the seder. That's called making it lishma. It's best that matzah should be made. The lishma should start from the time that the grain is harvested. You should have in mind we're harvesting this grain for the potential use at the seder. We make sure it's not chametz, and for the potential use at the seder, and basically all handmade matzah is shmura mishatz katsira. Now machine matzah is usually not, but hand matzah is usually shmura mishatz katsira. We're only talking about hand matzah today. Now the shema has to be made with people should be made by the people who are actually working the dough. They're mixing it, they're kneading, they're rolling it, etc. And that makes a big nafkamina between different brands of handmade matzah. Some hold that only a Shomer Shabbos person is the person who's able to have the correct kavana, the right intentions to make it lishma. It could be a man or a lady, but it has to be someone who's Shomer Shabbos. And therefore, those bakeries make sure that all the people who work with the flour and the dough, etc., all the people in the process who are involved, I mean, not the people who clean up and things like that, but the people who are involved in the actual making the matzah, those people are all Shomer Shabbos. And others are more makel and say, no, and anybody could do it. It doesn't have to be necessarily a Shomer Shabbos. And some have people who are not even Jewish altogether. Okay. Now, lastly is that there's a relatively recent innovation where some bakeries will use some hand bakeries, but they use some devices that are not electric, powered by people. They use these different kind of devices to help making in the matzah baking. So, for example, they might have a roller instead of a single roller. They have two rollers next to each other that help roll the dough out together, or the kneading of the dough is done with something that's operated by foot instead of by hand, which is more powerful, or the other similar devices like that. Now, some people are concerned that those using these devices makes the dough not to be made lishma, because the person is less involved in his hand making of the matzah. And others say that it's just more efficient, and it helps very much to avoid chimutz because it's a faster process. And since it's made by a human being, everything is 100% human powered. Therefore, they consider it to be made lishma.